Today's sermon is entitled, The Fight Against Evil. Now, the sermon we had yesterday was entitled, Satan's Hatred for God. There are many ways to express some of these things and go through different examples in Scripture, but the focus that we're being given, that God is giving to us, that Joshua is giving to us at this feast, has to do with an order of events that we are to reflect upon and think about. You know, it's not like the Old Testament where they went out and built the booth and then they were to go out there and sit and contemplate, think about, meditate a little bit at least upon what they were doing, why they were there, how they were blessed to be able to be there. So they were to think back to the time that Israel came out of Egypt and they were in the wilderness for 40 years and in temporary dwellings, and then God bringing them into the promised land. So they were to think about those things. They were to think about God. They were to think about the great God of the universe and what He had done for them. They were to contemplate, think about those things throughout the feast. Well, we have a different way that God has us do that. We don't go and sit in a booth particularly, obviously. We don't go out and build something like they did in the Old Testament. But we learn this on a spiritual plane, what it means to be in a temporary dwelling. And whatever that time is, that God works with us as His people. And with that then, there are those things that we are able to come together every day during the feast, the holy day, beginning the feast, and then a Sabbath within the feast at some point, and all the days throughout the feast and the 7 days, and then finally the last great day. But again here, the point being is that we don't have to think about, in the sense we are to in our prayers, obviously, before God, but God ensures that through the process He's established, through the design that He's given for a church, the ministry within the church, to teach about the things that have to do with whatever He is giving through the ministry to the church at a particular time, that we're able to think on those things that have to do a lot sometimes with our history and our past, that have to do with looking forward and looking ahead to the fulfillment of God's plan, and especially the meaning of this period of time, and looking forward to all those things that God is going to accomplish and what we're to be doing now. So all this fits together. And so God ensures that we're sitting in services, reflecting on these things through the power and help of God's Holy Spirit to teach us, to mold and fashion us, way above and beyond anything that the physical carnal Israelites did. So we still bring with us the carnality, and that pops up oftentimes, really day by day. There are some events or there's something that happens where carnality pops out of individuals. We have to be on guard against those things. And that's part of what this sermon is about as well, because it fits the fight against evil. We're not to yield to our carnal human nature, our selfishness. We're to fight it. And of all places, we should be able to fight it more during the Feast of Tabernacles. It should be easier with God's Spirit, with God's help, and the focus, if we grasp and understand what we're doing, what we're reflecting upon, that we're here to honor God, we're here to glorify God and His Son Joshua by how we are living, then there are certain things that just shouldn't come out of us. So either we're living this life and living it in truth and spirit, or there are some huge things we need to work on. And sometimes all of us have things we need to work on anyway at different levels, but sometimes things come out in a way that really shouldn't come out. So things to reflect upon. The fight against evil. So again, there is a reason for the order of these sermons and what we're being given opportunity to learn and build upon. Oftentimes it's good for us to reflect upon and think, even as we're listening to sermons, we may have a lot of the knowledge now, depending on how long we've been in the church, of various things we go into Scripture and look at. But indeed, we're to go there. I don't care how many times we go to a certain... I love John 14. I don't care how many times I go there. I am inspired. I am moved by what God revealed, what was given, what Christ gave at that particular time on the night of Passover, His last Passover, when He was going to then the following day be beaten as He was and die in the manner that He had to die for all of us, to have His blood spilled to the earth. We're able to reflect and think upon these things and think about how we're able to be here, and yet we're to build upon that. So like John 14, again, I don't care what scriptures they are. If they were in a certain context, though we have certain knowledge of them, we still have things to learn, to grow in understanding of, It's not just a matter of knowledge. As this feast started out, as we began to focus upon that, we have to go beyond just knowledge, because sometimes we get lifted up by knowledge because we know certain things, we have been given certain things, or we know things that others in the world don't know. But that doesn't mean we understand it. What good is the knowledge without understanding? Without understanding how it all fits together? And that's something that can't be given to anyone by me speaking, or by some other minister speaking, or by something that's written and you read. It's a matter of a relationship you have with God, and God's Holy Spirit then, to the degree it works within you, dwells within you, to the degree you're yielding to it and want it because you have to cry out for it, you have to fight for it. You have to fight against this to receive it. And right there is a sermon. Right there is a sermon. We've got to fight against this to receive what God says we can have. But He doesn't just give it all to us, even though it's placed before us. What a horrible thing if we have so much placed before us and we're not able to partake of it. We're not able to eat of it or drink of it. Well, that's a matter of the thing of growing in understanding and not just receiving knowledge and not look what happened to Philadelphia at the end when God's apostle was gone, when Herbert Armstrong died. And we went into the period of Laodicea. And as Herbert Armstrong began to talk about, he wondered how many people really get it. I think of some of those sermons when he came back stronger than ever after his heart problems in the late 70s there, and then toward the end of the 70s and going on into the early 80s. And he came back with greater strength and power and saw problems, and we didn't know it at the time, but looking back now and understanding what he was saying and what he was directing, so much of it was toward the ministry and toward the leadership of the ministry in Pasadena. And he asked the question, how many of you get it? And he made the comment, do half of you? And I believe he was of the conviction of that time that God gave it to him that half didn't really get it. You think, with all the knowledge, and that's a part of the problem. Philadelphia was getting ready to go into Laodicea, an attitude of being rich and increased with goods. Had the knowledge, but didn't get it. Didn't understand it. I think of the first thing that's attributed to Herbert Armstrong that God gave through him to the church, the matter of government. Number one in that respect, or number four of all the truths. So you think government, and how many really got it? That means understanding. Knowledge is one thing because people have different concepts of government, and we saw government highly abused within God's church. That's not government. Oppression is not government. Haughtiness is not government. And so people thought they knew. Well, they had certain knowledge about things that were there, but they misused it, which means not a lack of total understanding of what it's all about, of what God is doing, of God's structure within the church. So I've given those examples of different things that have happened. My experiences going into the ministry and being trained in that period was one of an abuse and a misuse of government. And I learned through that. God was teaching me in that this isn't how it's done, that there's something missing. And it was very clearly God's Spirit was missing. So we can think we're all in the body and we're doing great because we go to services and send in tithes and offerings. And sometimes people haven't done that. But, in the church and coming to services and going to the Feast of Tabernacles, that's not what it's all about. It's way beyond that. That's just simple obedience. But to learn and understand what that is all about and the purpose of it all is another matter. So oftentimes we have this process within the church that people have knowledge of various things and maybe a lot of knowledge, but are we building upon the knowledge and becoming puffed up by it and just building knowledge? Or are we growing in understanding and being able to see things in the way God wants us to see them? He wants us to understand why He has worked with us in the manner that He has, why we go through the things we do, why we need to be reminded of various things. We need to understand that, why we need to continually be reminded of various things. Why do we have a Passover every year and we focus upon that every year? Do we understand? Or is it just something that God commanded? We have a certain day and we're to talk about Passover and we're to go take the bread and the wine and it's just a routine we go through? Or do we understand it and deeply appreciate it and grasp the reasons why we, as carnal, physical human beings, have to have such a focus? And there it is with the holy days. And then every Sabbath, every seventh day, a reminder of the things we need to have our minds upon and thinking about and need to be changing and working on in our lives. Because too often, just like the carnal physical world and people going to their services, whatever that is, on a Sunday, if they even bother going anymore, because most don't, and they go through these routines, and if we're not careful, that's what can happen within the church. People can become like just a shallow matter of knowledge, but not understanding it, not growing in it, in other words, without God's Spirit. What a horrible thing. And there is still that within the church. How do I know that? Because God has let me know that every year some are going to be leaving. And it doesn't just happen in the last few weeks before they leave or are put out. It doesn't just happen in the last few months. It's something that's gone on for a long time that's been working up here. It's not overnight. It's a matter of a way of thinking that is wrong. And I wish above all things, when I see certain people going through various things, I see some faces right now and some situations in people's lives of things I see and know, but it's not my job to go around and say, do you know where you are? Do you grasp your attitude? Do you grasp what you're doing? Do you grasp that you don't understand? I do that in sermons. It's up to us whether we hear. It's up to us whether we're crying out to God before we ever go to Sabbath services or to a service during the holy day, during this period of time, during any of the days of the Feast of Tabernacles. And it's up to us whether or not we're going to be able to receive what God is giving to us, whether we're crying out for it, because you have to work for it, you have to fight for it, you have to fight against this, and you have to ask God because you know you need it, and if you know you need it, you'll cry out to God for it. I need help. I need help. My prayer this morning was about that. Walking around this lake out here, this pond or whatever it is, with the fountains in it, beautiful, peaceful, and yet knowing I need help. I need help every day. On a spiritual plane, we have to see that. And if we see that and believe that, then we'll ask God for it. We'll cry out for it, because that's where it comes from. You can't do it on your own. And yet too many just go through the routine, going back and forth from Sabbath services. And so I see faces, and I think of names, and I feel for you. Because sooner or later, you're either going to change and get with the program and be a part of the body and engage with the body, get rid of the foul attitude that stinks. What is owed to you that you carry such things? Where is the love? Where is the care for others? Where is, instead of finding fault with others that, so-and-so hasn't done this to me or spoken to me or asked me to do this with them or whatever it might be, so often people just back away rather than engaging. You go out and be with people and visit with people, and that's up to you. It's amazing what can happen to carnal human beings sometimes when we start to turn inward and think about ourselves rather than thinking about what we're supposed to be doing and how we're supposed to do it. And God will bless us, asking God for help to have a right spirit, a right mind, a right love, to have a graciousness towards others. But too often we carry this chip on our shoulder, and it's evident. I see it. I know when there's a chip out there. My wife knows when some have a chip out there. And you can't hide it. Well, why should that be in God's church? Well, the truth is, it isn't in God's church. I think of this. Someone said here just before the feast, they were talking about how they're going to be in the courtyard this year, and the other individual popped up and said, well, I'm going to be in the temple. It's within a family, so they can get by with those things. Anyway, so as I was just starting to say that about the courtyard, I couldn't help but think of the courtyard over there. But anyway, we can be in the courtyard and not even know it, because in the courtyard is darkness. In the courtyard, there's evil, and there's more power of a spirit world able to reach us. Only within the temple if we're striving to be in the temple and fighting to be in the temple, only there can we receive the help and the protection and the favor from God and the Spirit of God in our minds and our being to live what we need to live and to be in a fight that we can be successful in. Because God has to give that help. You can't do it on your own, and you can't do it just by going through the motions. So I hope that there are those of you who can learn. I don't know how many. There may be quite a few. But God is giving you the opportunity to repent, to change, to cry out to Him, to seek His help, to seek His favor, because Joshua the Christ and God the Father want us to succeed. But it's up to us to receive that, to hear that. So again here, there is a reason. Second sentence already in my notes. I'm sure I'll start breezing through it more quickly here in a moment, but there's a reason for the order of these sermons and what we're being given opportunity to learn and build upon. It's a spiritual thing to grasp that, to hear that, and to understand that, and then to ask God for help to receive what He's giving. Because sometimes we just hear, and certain knowledge there that we're familiar with that, we're familiar with those scriptures, and then we can turn off. So this has to do with coming to deeper understanding. Understanding. How often that word pops up. Understanding. It's more than knowledge. It's something we have to understand. To a deeper understanding of the sources of evil. Do you know one of the greatest sources of evil that you have to fight? What's inside of us? The carnal, selfish human nature. And then we work to conquer those things, and we become more refined, and we are conquering those things if we're yielding to God and God's Spirit, and they're becoming more refined. But there's the more you fight that, the more that God will reveal you the sources of all that, where it starts, to where that's where the greatest battle is in one respect, and the greatest of conquering is when you get to the sources of the thinking that lead to certain things, and how quickly you can address those in your mind, which we all have to grow in that in various degrees. To accomplish this, we must come to see and understand more clearly why God has created, in the context of this sermon, angelic life and human life as He has. This is an incredible thing that God revealed back in 2010 to the church. It really is. And we, since that time, 14 years have passed, and to the degree we understand it, I don't know. It's not because it's not just knowledge, but we hear about it. We heard about it 7 years later, as I mentioned. And now we're addressing it again, another 7 years later. So, what did I say, 2010? Yes. Anyway, and again here, the reason for angelic life and human life, to me, it's an awesome thing, because there's really deep understanding here of the process of why in the beginning for so long, and we can't grasp that, millions, billions of years? We don't know. We don't understand. And God created angelic life first, that was of spirit, and then to understand the process whereby He began to create a physical universe with physical laws, and the angelic realm shouted for joy. They were so excited by what they saw and experienced that it was something above and beyond, in that sense, just spirit life. Spirit life is one thing, but there's something unique that we don't fully grasp yet about a physical creation, and spirit life to exist and be in that creation that is more awesome in that respect, of something that is more rewarding, of things that can be done and accomplished within it, to be built upon within it, to beautify within it. So again, to understand more clearly why God has created angelic life and human life as He has, and understand the order of that creation as well. Because these are the things that help us to come into greater unity and agreement and oneness with God. To grasp such things, to say, now I get it. Now I see why it had to be that way, and it couldn't be any other way. That it had to be exactly like that. And the time, well, we can't fully grasp that, but to understand that as well. The things that took place because of Spirit. Anyway. So if we do not grasp why God created the angelic realm as He did, and why He created mankind as He did, and the order of it all, then we're not going to be able to grasp as well what God is offering us in this kind of sermon, or in many sermons actually. We're being given an opportunity to come into far greater agreement. That's what God is telling us. We're being given opportunity to come into far greater agreement, because there is no period of time before this, no period of time before this in the past 6,000 years now, where people understood these things that we're talking about today. They didn't know them. They weren't given. How blessed are we that we live in a specific time that is so unique to us, to have opportunity to be molded and fashioned in this period of time, just before God's kingdom is established on the earth, of something that righteous people, in the sense of them believing God and living by what they were given, that those that are going to be part of that 144,000, that they have received and looked forward to and didn't grasp. I mean, just to grasp that they look for a city whose builder and maker is God, what did that mean to them? Well, they had very little grasp or understanding or knowledge of what was being given there. They didn't have anything to build upon in the sense of knowledge. It was just very basic, and they were judged accordingly, and they lived faithfully according to that. But to be given so much more wealth, the farther we go into time, the more wealth we receive in every way. God wants to give us. We're to be inheritors of everything. We can't grasp that, but there's so much out there. So we're given opportunity to come into far greater agreement with God and His creation. It is that agreement and oneness of approval that will give us greater ability to fight against the evil. What does that mean? It is that agreement and oneness. We believe God. We choose to believe God. We have come to the point where we understand that whatever God says, whatever God gives, that we are to choose to be in agreement with that. Whether we want to hold on to that because we do agree with it, we see it, and we begin to understand it, and so we embrace it even that much more. But it is that agreement and oneness of approval. See, we have to approve. What a crazy thing to think about. We should approve? Yes, in your mind, you must approve. Not just approve, but embrace it and know and learn and build upon that. What else would we want but to be in approval of all that God gives us? But that's the carnality we have to fight. Because the reality is that everyone who leaves or goes astray or chooses something else besides what God has given, they're not in approval of God. They even get to the point where they really don't believe the God that you're hearing about, the God that has eternally existed, the one eternal God. And Joshua, his son, who was born and had a beginning when he was born of Mary, and all the things that go with that. Because what other group, what other organization, except for that which is scattered, has any knowledge of some of the, well, they don't even have that, because they don't believe that there's one eternal God who's eternally existed, the self-existing one, because they still have this concept, this idea that Joshua was Yahweh, Elohim. And God's brought us way past that now. So we're the only ones that embrace such things to that scale and all that goes with that, with the understanding of it. Joshua. Incredible. How blessed are we? How much it should humble us mightily to think upon such things. So in our minds, with our nature, it has to be a matter of approval. And more than that. We'll Well, let's first go back to the very beginning of the source of evil, to the beginning of evil. I think of so often again, Herbert Armstrong, the Feast of Tabernacles. So often, that's where he would start with teaching about government, because what he desired with all of his being in that respect was to help the church to understand God's government. And yet, it's the one thing that, after time, took such a beating as far as the leadership, evangelists and different ones, different heads of some of the different departments out there in Pasadena, and how people began to drift away. And yet he would go back here and give this history of what took place, because we have to be able to see that and understand what happened there. And I think of how much more God has blessed us to build upon that, even from what was given back then, because that was kind of an overview, in a sense, of what can happen in government. But that's where it started, to understand, or to begin to understand that mind and how destructive it is. But how many in the church, those who went into Laodicea and the ministry, I think incredibly devastating, because it was the fault of the ministry first and foremost, because they didn't perceive and receive God's government, that the rest began to go in the same direction. It shows the incredible dangers then. It's like what Lucifer did when he became Satan and led a third of the angels. That's the kind of destruction that can be caused by such thinking, by such a mind. And we've got to understand this then, because it's repeated itself throughout the history of mankind. It repeated itself within God's own church that had the ability, had the impregnation of God's Spirit within them, and yet turned against God. That is so heinous. I'm so thankful in the last couple of years that God has been helping us to zero in on that more and more, that that's such a hideous and heinous thing for a human being to do, once impregnated with the power of God's Spirit in the very mind, and then to begin to let it die out, become set in something different to where God won't be there anymore. That's why I like the example that was given is, can Christ be killed twice? Can you put him to death twice? Can you go through the same process twice? The judgment on that is going to be very strong, because it has to be, depending on the person's mind and where they were. There might be certain situations and circumstances where there's a purpose for the ability of granting certain forgiveness later on, but in many cases, it's over spiritually. Ezekiel 28. Ezekiel 28, just a little bit. There's much more here, but Ezekiel 28 and verse 15. You were perfect in your ways from the day that you were created, as far as a being, and within the angelic realm, the perfection that was there, the things that God gave on a spirit plane that we, not of the Holy Spirit, but of that which is spirit, a composition of something of spirit, and the beauty that was there, and the abilities that were given to this being, and the height of the angelic realm, candidly. You were perfect in your ways from the day that you were created. God gave him so much. God gave that angelic being so much, along with two others, until iniquity was found in you. Unthinkable. Created of spirit, given a spirit realm to dwell within, given great power in the government of God, the mountain of God as it's described, and yet at a certain point, something switched and changed in the thinking, and it became set that way, and would never want to repent again, because it was through a choice on a spiritual plane, or a spirit plane, if you will, that changed the mind and the thinking of that being forever. No desire to ever repent, because that was a choice that was made. It's hard to understand, perhaps, but you can build upon that and grow an understanding of it. So again, the beginning of evil in God's creation. And yet God knew all along, had planned a purpose for these things, knowing what his creation would do when he gave certain abilities. That's a tough thing. But in order for Elohim to be created, that had to take place. Did God know that an angelic being would do this? Absolutely. Absolutely. By their own choice. So God gives many opportunities and abilities to different ones through time. And it's up to each in that creation with the free moral agent mind to choose what it is they want and what they will receive. It isn't God's fault. There had to be free moral agency in the mind, free choice. And God knew by the very fact of how the creation would be, that if there was one at the pinnacle of that, what they would do in time. It's the way it is. It's the way it is. It's what can happen in time. Millions, billions of years. We don't know how long it was before it happened, but it happened. When other things came along, especially coming to a knowledge that God has more to create than that physical universe. He's going to put a specific kind of life on one little planet. And they're going to be physical. They're going to be carnal. They're going to be filled with selfishness. They're going to be given temporary life. And yet they have the capacity to become part of the God family, above and beyond the angelic realm. Whew. Sometimes people don't take things that well. And someone else comes along, someone gets ordained, and they don't agree that that person should have been ordained, they should have been ordained. You know, the haughtiness of human thinking and so forth that can happen, happens a lot more quickly in human beings, obviously. But those kinds of things are things that people can choose to fight against and conquer and overcome or not. And sometimes, even to this day, there's still things being judged out here by people. You know, who are you? By the very fact of how some people are talked to, reflects you don't get it, reflects a wrong spirit and an inability to grasp it all. This is God's doing for a purpose. Does it mean everyone's perfect? No, but it's an order of things. And it's how we respond to that God has placed within His government that counts. We're carnal human beings. We all have problems. We all have weaknesses. And if you don't think you do, there's a giant problem, because this is the thing we have to work upon. Anyway, by the multitude of your merchandise, your trafficking, your trading, they have filled the midst of you with violence. So this whatever was involved in all this. Don't know that we know all this by any measure, because I know we don't. But we know part of it. What was it that he was trafficking in? Different knowledge, different ideas. They never experienced that. The angelic realm had never experienced that until Lucifer started it. So when you look at the situation that was taking place there, here's an angelic realm that's doing the things that God has set out and given to them as plans to fulfill and accomplish, and they were to go out there and work and accomplish it. They had to work a lot in doing what they were doing and bringing certain things to pass through the power and abilities that God gave to them. And then, and they did it. This is God. He's given us, and they just did it because that was their joy, that was their enjoyment, until one came along with some different ideas. And he began to spread those around, trafficking in this kind of knowledge. Merchandising, as God says. What does that mean? To get something for yourself. One being began to try to get things for himself. Try to become wealthier himself, raised up in greater pride in himself. It's about self, selfishness. If we don't understand that our selfishness stinks, there are things we just don't grasp. And that's the thing that should help us to turn away from some of wrong attitudes, wrong speech, wrong responses to God's ministers. Where is the fear? Where in it indeed a fear for doing wrong, for sinning, because that's sin. Where's the fear in doing something like that? That should shake us to the core of our being that we could do something like that, because too often then we can't see the end of that, and that's what we're doing to God. That's what we're doing to God. You might as well just talk to God with that kind of an attitude. How far is that going to get you? You think God's going to be pleased with that? If you say it to someone like that, or to another brother who is filled with God's Spirit, and it's wrong. It's to God. That's the attitude. That's the way God receives it to one of his children. And so it's like, okay. But if we could see that, if we understood, that's not just knowledge. Because a lot of times we don't pay any attention to the knowledge. We have certain knowledge and we choose what we hold on to and what we don't hold on to. Some of the stuff we don't like to hold on to because we don't agree with it. That's the problem. And so, again here, it's a matter of understanding, of recognizing here, understanding this is wrong. It's wrong toward God. And we're not going to get very far if we have a bad attitude toward God. Who would dare do such a thing? Anyway. By the multitude of your merchandise, they have filled the midst of you with violence. See, the result of that is drama. It's evil. It's things going wrong. Drama is not good. I've already heard too much drama here at the feast. Doesn't take a lot, just a few here and there, to create drama that put a sour thing within the framework of things where you'd like to see everything go so smoothly and everybody do so well together and everybody treat with respect and honor to an office that's there. And cooperate, because you want that. You want it to be better for others in the congregation, to give them a better opportunity to learn and grow and be attentive during a Sabbath service as an example, or whatever it might be. Those things are the result of understanding and growth and wisdom. See, knowledge doesn't get it. There's a lot more. It's what we do with the knowledge that counts. It's what we do with the knowledge that counts, that reflects and reveals whether or not we really have and are growing in understanding. And if we're growing in understanding, there are things we will fear to do that are wrong, and we'll fight against them. That will stir up a desire to ask God for his Holy Spirit to fight against certain things in self or in the world coming at us. So this Hebrew word for violence and wrong, if you will, that's what it means, this word violence. Whatever, it's wrong, and if something is wrong, it produces that which is not good. It produces evil. So this was the first that was ever experienced in the angelic realm that was wrong by nature, by creation, if you will, and it produced violence. In time, great violence came out of it. Again, I don't comprehend spirit wars, but there are accounts in Scripture of battles, and God allows that. He allowed that with the nation of Israel to have battles. There are things to be learned from some of those things, and most of it is on a spiritual plane when we learn battles, because our warfare is on a spiritual plane. But we can look at those kinds of things and learn from that on a spiritual plane. So this word is also translated as cruelty and oppression, violence, oppression. So what Lucifer did when he became Satan, it was oppressive to the spirit realm, to the angelic realm. It was painful, it was hurtful. It began to create a destructive relationship within the angelic realm. A horrible thing that took place. And that's exactly what happens on a physical plane. A little bit of that kind of thing within a body or in the environment of a body, not necessarily in the body when you speak of the body of Christ, because it's been cut off, not even see it, it's out in the courtyard, but it's still in the environment. And to recognize the oppressiveness that is, how oppressive that is, what it creates, what it stirs up, and takes away from joy. It takes away from the fullness of happiness and joy that God desires us to experience at a Feast of Tabernacles, as an example, or throughout our lives. So again, this was the first of its kind in the angelic realm. Horrifying, horrible. So let's consider the definition of these words. I've done this in times past and gone through some of these things, but of the word wrong. That which is incorrect, not true. What he was doing was not true. What some live around the environment is not true. It's not how we're supposed to be living. It's false. It's trafficking in things that, in a perverted way, feed self and selfishness. We choose whether we're going to be selfish, and we choose our own response because it's about our own pride and how we think things should be and what we think someone else should do for us because we deserve something else than what they're giving to us or offering us. It makes me want to puke. Incorrect, and this is going to be cleaned up in God's church. God's cleaning it up. We are to become a body that is purified, whether it be in the next several months, and God's going to take care of those things, or in a few years. We don't know. We watch the news. What a unique thing. And how we live our lives. As we heard yesterday as an example, we're preparing as though this can happen at any moment. What could happen around the nation of Israel itself with one of the tribes? And what can happen in the Middle East and how that could turn everything and start a process that can't be stopped, or whatever else it might be in some part of the world. But that one's a hotbed right now, let alone what's happening between Ukraine and Russia and stirring up that, because what that one is doing is molding and fashioning the minds of Europeans. It's changing the attitude, the thinking, and the minds of Europeans. I'm really dumbfounded by that one because 10, 15, 20 years ago, there's no way I could see that, or anyone could see that. How could they end up doing what's given in the fifth trumpet? It's like, it's just not there. At a whim, why would they do that? Why would they agree on something? And now it's easier to see. It's easier to grasp. It's easier to understand this process and what has to take place. And so we live as though these things could happen speedily, even this past year, thinking, what's going to happen in the beginning of the year? And things just get worse and worse out there. The saber rattling of nuclear weapons, the use of them, and certain countries pushing the ideas and the thought of them, insanity. But to push those in time, keep pushing the idea, and after a while, it becomes a reality. But it's going to be in God's time. So where are we? Well, maybe God does have a plan for us for 40 years. Maybe it was always set that way. And if it is, then the 144,000 and what could take place there is all a part of that. And they're molding and fashioning and the time it was going to take to do it. I was thinking here, going back nearly 30 years now, 1994, it all began. The apostasy. Sometimes it's good to be reminded of our past and think about where we are, just like they said in Booze, and it's good for us to think about some of those things and how we got where we are. 1994. And then all of a sudden, the changes that took place, that 3.5 years we had to go through until we were able to become strong enough to be reestablished to become the Church of God once again. And Satan was kept away from us, from the church, and those whom God was working with and preparing to continue on. Incredible process we went through until we came up to Pentecost of 1998. And then to think of the period of time there, jump ahead 10 years. And what took place? 1994, all the way, and what we had to go through to get up to 2004, just 10 years. A lot happened in that 10 years. We began traveling to Australia, New Zealand, and Europe in the beginning of that period of time, as far as 2000 is concerned. And God began to work with people who were being drawn out of the scattered groups and giving them opportunity to grow, to see things. There aren't that many left who were being drawn out during those periods of time, of those who were scattered, who were being reawakened, or awakened, if you will, reawakened, because they'd fallen asleep. Everyone had. And God was helping people to become awake, to be able to hear something. And then up to them to choose it, to hold on to it, to grasp how blessed they were, that they weren't out here wandering around and blindness. People didn't understand that we'd had an apostasy. They didn't grasp those things. They didn't grasp the things about what Christ said. There wouldn't be one stone left upon another. Didn't grasp the things about Laodicea, that God was going to vomit out the entirety of the church. That means to separate it from himself, that no one would be in the body for a moment in time until he began to awaken and then draw back people through repentance and change and seeing what we had all done, how wrong it was, what we had done, what we allowed, we caused. We all did. We all caused or were part of that which led to the apostasy. And then it's up to us to begin fighting against that when God helped us to see it. So I think of that period, 1994 to 2004, and all that God was giving, all the things to hold fast. I think of that sequoia tree. I think it's sequoia. Anyway, those giant trees and so majestic, and thinking about the expression to hold fast at the trunk of the tree, hold on with all of your being, fight for what God has given to you. And we had to fight. We had to fight different groups and different things that were being taught out there in order to help people to keep on track. We had to fight about things concerning Passover, and that took a lot of time. And God began revealing more and more to us. And then Pentecost, and then the idea of going to heaven, and on and on it goes. There were so many doctrines out there and ideas that people had, and God was streamlining things and making things sound and building upon those in ways that we had never seen them before. What an awesome experience. And there's so many who experienced those things up to 2004 who are no longer with us. A lot of people who are no longer with us. Far larger, many times larger than what we have attending the feast around the world today. Incredible to know what we went through. That even after being awakened, that so many gave it up, pushed it aside. It was too hard. Or whatever. There are other things they wanted to have. Anyway, and then that period of time, then the next 10 years. A lot happened between 2004 and 2014. And I have to say that 2014 wasn't the greatest experience of my life. Being in that camp, I call it prison, imprisoned, if you will, for that period of time. And yet, God very much with me and gave me opportunity to learn and build upon and continue to grow, to continue to write. And anyway, you think about some of those things we go through in life, and yet after 2004, it was beginning around that period of time, 2005, 2006, 2007, that God began to work in another manner than he had before. And that was to bring people new into the body. Now, God knows how to mold and fashion us and what it's going to take to fill and fulfill his purpose and his government. And I think of the things we went through, what we began to go through during all that happened at that time. I think of that which led up to 2008, and then the trial, the testing, the change of something that some used as their excuse or their reason for being in disagreement really with me, because they didn't see God in the picture at all. It was a matter of me and so forth. And so if you put a personality in there and you find enough fault with them, and so 2008 came up to this point of a change, that Christ wasn't going to return on the Feast of Trumpets. He's going to return during a period of Pentecost, during the time of Pentecost. And that blew some people's minds, blew their minds to make a change in something concerning a holy day and the meaning of it and the like. And there were those who couldn't take that. Well, again, we can learn from those things. And so those attitudes alone and others that God began to work with, because there are those, I think of the scriptures about a crown and whether or not you're going to hold on to it or give it up. And some gave up their crown, what God was giving to them. And there were those who were given incredible opportunities, individuals within the ministry. Incredible opportunities to learn various things of how to work with people and so forth, and yet that went by the wayside. Incredible what was taking place. So God gives a lot of opportunities. It doesn't mean that individuals are always right or yielding to those things, and those are choices. And a lot of times it's to bring out things so that we can learn and see from them as well. So anyway, a lot left. And then it was later on that God began to reveal that there are others that he's going to work with to give those crowns to give opportunity for those crowns, who have been called to be worked with. And how long does that take? Let's see. When were you drawn? 2005, that early? 2006, 2007, 2008? Because a lot of you were called within that period of time. Your minds were opened up and you began to receive what God was offering. And so you think about that period of time and how long is it going to take now to become molded in fashion to a point of being in Elohim at Christ's coming, to be part of the 144,000. Another 10 years? 2006, 2016, if you were called in 2008, 2018, only 10 years. There are things about how long it might take we don't know yet. And that's fully in God's hands as to what he's constructing and what he's building. Some things in a building take longer to shape and prepare to fit into place. Taking me a long time. Different ones, whatever it is that's taking place and whatever God's purpose is. And so it won't blow my mind if it's going to be 2034. It really doesn't. And willing to go through that because there aren't really a whole lot of other options anyway. You either continue on, you keep fighting, and I embrace whatever God gives us because that's what's best. Hoping and praying in that regard that it's going to be soon, that the suffering of this world is going to end soon. Things are in place in a powerful way. Don't know how they could keep going, but if it's God's purpose to go longer and these attitudes and spirit and things that are taking place in Europe grow and become stronger, well, that will become evident in time. And so we'll continue to watch on that front row seat. And I keep trying to get up in the bleachers, but anyway. So we're going through a lot, but what a unique thing. We have to be prepared now. Tomorrow, this world could totally change overnight. So when is that going to be? We don't know. We keep fighting. And God is molding something incredibly unique within us, but we're also looking ahead more now because we have to contemplate the possibility that we continue to plan in our life and prepare in our life for a longer period. And we also have to be prepared for something happening soon. We are very unique in that regard now more than any other time within the church because of what we see taking place in the world, because of the thunders we see and all of that that's taking place and how much it has increased. I think of some of these things with having to do with hurricanes. They were so long, it's like they weren't being allowed to come. They'd come a certain distance and it's like, not now. It's not time for that thunder. And then all of a sudden, wham, wham, wham. You know, is this a part of that? Well, obviously it is. But there have to be other thunders. How strong they're going to become before things actually begin with the trumpets, we don't know. But we keep watching. Anyway. So it's good to remember some of the things of our history because there's been a lot of evil that we've had to address. There's been a lot of evil where we've had to make choices. And there are more who have made the wrong choices because they've yielded to evil than there are those who have continued to fight, let alone fight against the evil. So wrong, incorrect, not true, that which is false, immoral, unjust, dishonest. I loathe dishonesty. I loathe lying. I loathe it. I can understand why God says that in Proverbs and other places. Talks about this hatred for lying because Satan has a lying spirit, always has had since he started doing what he did. Very deceptive. And I don't like lies. I don't like false stories that too often individuals get involved in. And generally it's about building up self, making self seem bigger and better than what maybe they think that others perceive us as. Why do we have to do that? Why does anyone have to do that? No one has to, no one should. That kind of deception, that kind of deceit, that kind of lying is horrible. And so we have to hate those kinds of things. You have to hate something to stop it, to fight against it. I don't know how often I've said those things, but every once in a while it clicks with someone and they begin doing it, begin to fight against that kind of thing. If they see that there's a trait there or a characteristic within them that is something they should fight against, fight. I was thinking about that this morning, about this one individual that gets smacked upside the head and blood starts coming down and gets up and starts talking about fighting. Well, they're doing it on a physical plane. We live in a spirit world that's powerful, and we see certain things sometimes that have a spiritual likeness to it or a thing that's taking place. And this is a very common thing that's happened in the environment of God's church. And we have to learn from that. We can learn from those things and grow. But what an incredible thing to think that here we see certain things taking place, and amazing. Fight. We have to fight. We fight on a spiritual plane, not on a physical plane. There are things that people fight in the world, and we do it on a spiritual plane. We have to fight. It has to be a thing that comes out of the innermost part of our being, a willingness to fight selfishness, and then the evil in this world around us. That means to take action against it, to strive to do and walk what is right. Cruelty, another one of the definitions. Callous indifference. A horrible thing to become callous to certain things and just allow certain evil to continue in our life, certain attitudes to continue in our life. We have to fight. Doesn't mean we're not going to have some of those traits come out of us, but are we fighting it? Are we trying to conquer it? Are we praying to God for help to conquer it? Another one, pleasure in causing pain and suffering. What a horrible thing that some would come to that, taking a perverse pleasure in causing pain and suffering. And sometimes they don't see it as that. People will attack that which is right and good and twist and distort because they get a pleasure out of attacking and besmirching and lying, and their friends and so forth become those who are of the same kind of evil, perpetuating it and pushing it. Another one here, violence. Behavior involving the use of force to hurt, to damage, to destroy, to kill. That's how far things can go. So again, this violence that was in Satan, a violent environment, goes beyond drama into violence, into death, into killing and destruction. And Satan, as we talked about yesterday, there are so many examples in Scripture about the destruction he's tried to cause along the way. It's a perverseness of wanting to see mankind suffer, of wanting to see wars and the evil of wars. Perverse, just sick. Verse 16 of Ezekiel 28. By the multitude of your trafficking, your merchandise, they have filled the midst of you with violence, and you have sinned. Therefore, I have cast you as profane, in other words, defiled or polluted, to be rejected, out of the mountain of God. That's what God did to the church in Laodicea. Vomited it out as profane, as vile. It couldn't be a part of him. There are major lessons we're to learn in that. Just because we're in the environment of the church doesn't mean we're in the church. And that is an abomination to God. It's a vile thing, a profane thing. And so he's going to get rid of that. He's going to get rid of that in all the universe in time here. But anyway, so cast out of the mountain of God, out of the government of God. That's what it was about, the government of God. And I will destroy you. Isn't that an incredible thing? It's always been here, but God didn't give it to us to see in the church, because there was this idea that because something is created of spirit, the angelic beings are created of spirit, that the thought of them dying, the thought of them being destroyed was not even there. It wouldn't even be entertained, because they're spirit. They're forever. And God showed us, no, what he can create, he can uncreate. He can do away with it. Only God Almighty has eternal self-existing life inherent in himself. And anyone else that's going to continue on, it has to come from God. It's sustained by God, and it can be taken away by God. Awesome. How long has that been understood? How long has that been known and seen in the world? A few years. Amazing. We are so rich and so often don't grasp it. Those are the things we rejoice in, because we can thank God how much we have. So during the Feast of Tabernacles, we're reflecting on some things and helping us to come to see how blessed we really are. And if we're growing in thankfulness and gratitude to God for those things because we see them and we agree and we're at one with God in those things, we're just able to rejoice more, regardless of what others might do. We go on past that. We don't like it when we see certain ones not yielding to that process, but we go on and we have a great feast and we rejoice in what God is doing. Beautiful. And I will destroy you, O covering cherub, from the midst of the stones of fire. Speaking of the angelic realm. Not going to be there anymore. So it's near to impossible for mankind to come to see the truth of their own nature, of one's own nature, of one's own mind. The reality is you can't. God has to give it. God says he knows the mind. He knows the thinking. He knows what's inside. And he has to reveal it to us because we can't see it. We can't see our own flaws of selfishness and what it does. It's a spiritual thing and spiritual laws that are involved. And so God has to call us and we begin to see those things, and then we make choices to repent of those things, and on it goes. So only God can truly reveal it, but it's up to each person who is called to believe what he tells them or not. What a horrible thing to give it up, to not hold on to it any longer, to not entertain it anymore, to consider it anymore, but just to reject it all and walk away. That's a horrible thing, far more than I think we can grasp. Jeremiah 17 and verse 5. Thus says the Eternal, the one self-existing one, if you will, the self-existing one. Cursed is the one who trusts in mankind, who trusts in human life and human thinking. Cursed. So again, this concept, and sometimes, the reason I mention this is because sometimes that's been in the church in times past, because we hadn't grown to that point. It's as though God pronounces some kind of a curse and some kind of a plague and does something to someone, and that's not what it's about. They're just laws in motion that when you move away from God, turn away from God, these automatically come into your life. Not blessings and help and favor that God's laws produce on a, whether it be in a physical plane or a spiritual plane. Then we're able to be blessed by those things. Our lives are blessed the more we make the right choices. It's just an automatic thing. And we receive of God's Spirit and God's help. That's a spiritual thing. And we're blessed. But if it's the other direction, we are cursed. And everyone who leaves the church is cursed. Not by anything, the pronouncements that's passed upon them. It's because of what they've done automatically to themselves. Where God says, instead of life, you love death. Who thinks that way? They don't think that way, but that's the truth of it all. They just don't get it. They don't understand that yet, or never will, probably then. Thus says the Eternal, cursed is the one who trusts in mankind, in self. That's the worst of mankind, in self. To trust in self. That's one of our biggest frailties and flaws in the human body. We trust self because we have answers to things. We make our own, sometimes it's so frustrating. People can read things on the internet. You can read anything on the internet, and people come up with these conclusions of what they think is best in life, whether it be something physical or taking something physically, and you should do this or you should do that, and that'll help you, and this will resolve your problems, and because they become so convicted that this is the right thing and the only thing or whatever it might be, and we're so convicted and convinced, or other things in life that we see, and we think this is the best choice you should make, you should get this, you should do that, and we judge others and we decide for others what we believe is best best for them and their situation in life, and we don't have any idea what God is doing with them and how God is working and molding and fashioning them and through the process of what they're learning. But we know what's best. We have our own opinion. Ask it. People are willing to give their own opinion about various things. Where's the authority for it? Where is that which is absolute? That this is absolute. Thus says eternal God, cursed is the one that trusts in mankind and makes flesh their arm. What's that mean? You trust in self, your own strength, your own ability to see things, your own knowledge, how smart you are. That's sick. We tend to be lifted up by our pride. Just think about that. Do you have any kind of thoughts like that? That you know what is best? That you think and you see others, think about others? And what would be better for them if they just do it, if they just listen to you? Anyway. And whose heart departs from the eternal. Means to turn aside from the eternal. Whose heart. And the majority of people are still, even when I mention it, and you may get tired of hearing it, hopefully not. But I think of the majority who have ever been called since the church began in 31 AD. The majority have done this. Their heart has turned aside from God. What a horrifying thing. Instead of nurturing and crying out for and wanting to build upon a heart like David, after God's own heart, seeking to please and honor God in things we do, even in the physical things, in what we wear because we do it for God, or whatever it might be, and how we present ourselves, and the example we set in society and in the world. It doesn't mean that others have to see and know who you are and what you are, but we still set that right example of how to live, of how to take care of things, of how to take care of our own things that God has given. That reveals a lot about the mind, how we take care of our own things. What's our home like? Is it kept clean? Is it kept tidy? Do we take care of the things that God has given us because we know the principles that are there? Do we take care of the smell and seek to get rid of smell because we are cleaning and we keep things fresh and clean and keep up what God has given us? If we don't take care of that, what are we going to do later on when God gives us great power? Are we going to take care of whatever part we inherit and are given to oversee or to take care of or to build upon? What would that be like? Well, we have to learn it now in this physical life. Learning how to take care of self, learning how to take care of our hair, learning how to take care of ourselves or our cleanliness, and to have that kind of a mind that God gives us laws about cleanliness, not just about clean and unclean foods. So how do we take care of ourselves in that? About bathing and the like, or keeping something clean, or the outside of our home looking nice and decent. Or are we one of those neighbors, let our grass go up to, 1 foot or whatever, and our neighbors went, oh man, can't wait till they move, or we're able to find someplace else to live because this is an eyesore. It takes away from the enjoyment of the outside. You think, well, that's not important. It doesn't matter what our neighbors think. Well, are we trying to give to others? Or are we just trying to satisfy ourselves? Maybe just be lazy because we appreciate being lazy. We don't want to work too hard. We don't want to keep things clean. Do we keep the dishes clean in the house? Or do we let them build up to where, you go into a house and the sink is full? Think, man, well, if I need that cup, I can reach in there and rinse it out. Anyway, things we have to learn. If we can't learn them on the little things of life, what makes us think that we're going to be able to do the greater things, the big things? Because it's a mindset. It's the way we think. And makes flesh their arm, and whose heart departs from, turns aside from the eternal. For they will be like one destitute in a wilderness. Destitute, caught up in the wilderness without anything. People leave and they think they have more. They think they're better off. That's why they chose to leave. That's why they chose to do certain things they did, and because they want to keep certain things to themselves, like tithes or offerings or whatever, or second tithe. You just spend it all up, because I have it, whatever type of thing. And it's good to rejoice before God and be able to do special things and the like, but sometimes we can go too far with it or do too much on a physical plane. For they will be like one destitute in a wilderness and will not see when good comes. This is a horrible thing of the mind, that as the mind departs from God, one's heart departs from God and God's way, and we're not embracing truth and the way of life that God gives to us, and even the simplest of things I just mentioned, and when it begins to leave, then the mind really can't see clearly anymore, because God gives soundness of mind, clarity of thought and thinking that's sound, that's balanced, something that is you just don't see in the world today as a whole. And yet, this comes in the mind, so it says, and it gets to the point where a person can be in the wilderness and doesn't even get it, doesn't even see it. They're out there in the wilderness and they don't get it. They can't see it, that they're really in a wilderness, destitute, thinking that, someone leaves or chooses to be someone, and they think that they've gotten something better. Because isn't that the reason for not obeying God? For not living and holding on to what God has given us? Because something looks better out there. A person, a friendship, money, whatever it is, and it looks better, and that's what we hold on to, because the mind becomes perverted, desiring something we shouldn't have, and so it looks better than what God gives. So they're in the wilderness and don't even get it, and don't even understand it. And it says here, and when good comes, they will not see it. Can't even recognize what's good. Or else, within the church, would have kept it, because that's where the good is. Would have held on to it, embraced it, and not let it go, because we're fighting for it. Fighting against evil. Fighting against something like this happening, because the other is evil, to depart from God. But will dwell in the parched places, in other words, burnt out or charred places of the wilderness. That's what their choice is. They're going out into destruction, into the charred places, into things that are under destruction. What a choice between that which is good and beautiful and growing and flourishing and offering so much more into everlasting life, riches beyond anything we could ever grasp as human beings. In a salt land, which is a word, it's a desolate land, not dwelt in, not worth inhabiting. And this world is, in one respect, not worth inhabiting. If we understand it, it's one to be rejected, because God's bringing a different world, the one to be received, the one to be embraced. And that's why we look forward and look ahead to that, because this isn't worth keeping. This must only come to destruction. It must have an end, because it destroys, it corrupts, it hurts. There's so much suffering in this world. Just the word trafficking, we have a bit of a different definition as far as what we see of human life, children, women, the trafficking of drugs across the borders, all the things that are ruining people's lives, creating in towns people who live under bridges or in the shrubs on the side of a highway, trying to, just existing, not life, just existing. The result of disobedience, of a land filled with corruption and evil. Blessed is the one who trusts in the eternal. Blessed. So if we trust in God and look to God, we're going to be blessed. It's automatic. And whose hope the eternal is. So that's what we have. That's what we embrace, hopefully and prayerfully. Verse 8, for they shall be as a tree planted by the waters. So they give this example then of something in the wilderness that doesn't even get it, doesn't even see that they're in the wilderness, doesn't even see they're in a parched land that's worthless, to be rejected. But instead they choose to embrace it. Embrace its ways. That's what people do when they leave. They're embracing the ways of the world in their own thinking and their own distorted mind. Horrible, such choices. For they shall be as a tree planted by the waters that spreads its roots out on the river, and will not see when heat comes, but her leaf shall be green, and will not be concerned or anxious in the year of drought, neither will cease from yielding fruit. So again, two drastic extremes here. One that has plenty, one that is blessed, one that is filled, enriched, and an example of this, of a place that flourishes. The heart. Verse 9, the heart is deceitful above all things. Do we believe that? The heart, the human heart is deceitful? That's our battle, that we have to be careful. We have to be willing to fight against our wrong thinking and our wrong thoughts. And desperately wicked, who can know it? Desperately wicked. Selfishness is, this is a good example, desperately wicked. Selfishness is, it really is sick. It is wicked. It is evil. Who can know it? Well, God does. And if we yield ourselves to the process, He'll help us to see it and to change from it. Verse 10, I, the Eternal, search the heart. God knows what's in us. He knows what's in the mind, and He will help us to wade through those things and to get out the junk and the garbage and the things that aren't working right. I try the reins, even to give everyone according to their ways and according to the fruit of their doings. And only within the church, in the environment of the church, can someone then go through this process and begin to learn about their own ways, resisting God, and to fight against those things and to embrace the right ways. So again, it's a matter of whether we agree with God, or do we think or believe we're better than that there are things that we don't come into unity with. Let's turn over to Galatians. Galatians chapter 1. Verse 3. So in the New Testament now, some of the things, but again, over and over again throughout Scripture, things about evil, things about wickedness, and recognizing this is our battle. This is what has to be conquered. We have to fight against it. We have to make those choices, and we have to be engaged in it day by day, week by week. They don't just happen. And it has to do with whether or not you're willing to really look at yourself and change. Because I'll just tell you, there are some situations in some people's lives that I can count on every year. I know they're going to be a problem. I know they're going to do something that's not right. Why? Because it's been that way for several years now. Same ones. The same ones. A thorn in the flesh, as it were, because they will not address things in their life. They will not change. They will not work to make themselves have a better life within the church and the environment of the church. And then they bring it to the Feast of Tabernacles. And they do some of the same things with the mouth and with the attitudes. It's written all over their face. Got to conquer those things. Got to fight against those things. And if we're not willing to do that, what are we? Why are we here? Well, that's what God asks. Why are you here? Is it about time for you to go? Because God will decide that when it's time. When there'll be no more grace given, will there be no more favor? That's what this is. Favor, the granting of forgiveness of sin. And that has to do with where our minds are and how much we've been rejecting God and how long we continue to do it, because we're searing our own conscience and our own minds and our own thinking through this process. And if we're just not yielding to it and not receiving God's Spirit, not crying out for God's Spirit, there comes a time when He says, no more, no more. Grace to you and peace. That's what God desires, grace. That we be able to be forgiven of sin, which means we have to acknowledge our sin and willing to forgive it, be forgiven of it. So we cry out for forgiveness of sin through our Passover, Joshua the Christ. And we acknowledge that before God and realize I need help. And I have to start with this, that I be able to acknowledge the things that I do wrong and a willingness to admit them. I have done wrong. I have not done things I should do in the way that you've told me to do. And I want that to change. I want to have right thinking toward others in your church, in your body, who are your people. Grace to you and peace from God the Father. That's God's great desire, to create peace. He's creating peace in us if we'll yield to that. What a beautiful thing to understand, as we talked about in a sermon not too long ago. The creation of peace. That's what it's all about, from the time of what Lucifer did when God knew what he would do in time, and what he knew mankind would always do, would always turn inward, because he was created with a selfish mind that is able to have the lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, and the pride of life inherent within them. And then the opportunity when he began to give his Holy Spirit and draw them to the truth, that they'd be able to make a choice. Which do you want from here on? How do you want to live? Do you want to live with drama all your life? You know? Well, let's just give you reruns of days of our lives, whereas the world turns, and just sit there in front of that, and maybe that'll fulfill your need for drama. Or does it have to be because it's real life and people, and so you want to be in that kind of drama because that's even more exciting when it's happening in people and you get to be a part of it? Anyway, grace to you and peace from God the Father and from our Lord Joshua the Christ, who gave himself for our sins. that he might deliver us from this as our high priest through the process of forgiveness of sins as our Passover, but as our high priest, what he offers, what he gives, his life within us, and that of the Father, that might deliver us from this present evil world. So that's what I referred to a moment ago. It's an evil world. It isn't God's world yet. And even then, it's still very carnal, but at least if there's just one government and one truth throughout the earth, then mankind has such opportunity to embrace something in a profound way that has never been given to man in the first 6,000 years. And I hope you understand why that wasn't offered at the beginning. It couldn't be. And why mankind had to go through the process of 6,000 years of many, many people. Do you understand those things? Why so many? Because it's about so many. And God's purpose and God's plan for his family. And why carnal human nature had to be allowed. And why then God was just going to draw out various ones over 6,000 years to be molded and fashioned to be part of the 140. Do we understand that and agree with that and say, thank God that there's that which has been prepared for so long to begin a process of something that's so beautiful that it couldn't be done any other way to begin the millennium and have 1,000 years like that, let alone the 100 years that will follow. Those are things of understanding, not just knowledge. If we don't understand it, we're not as rejoicing and thankful to God for everything that he's doing and how he's doing it, because it's beautiful what God is doing. Verse 4, who gave himself for our sins that he might deliver us from this present evil world according to the will of God our Father. It's God's will that we have peace, that we become Jerusalem, the city of peace. You know, that's what's reflected in it. Not the city of drama, not the city of disobedience, not the city of doing our own will, our own ways, not the city of trafficking and other ideas of what we think, how we think things should be. That's just sick. We think our ways are better. Think of one who left not too long ago, and just not enough people in the church that would listen to their ideas anymore. It's like they don't want to really hear what's going on in the world around them. Well, you mean they've got the tap and their finger on what's really going on in the world better than anyone else, and somehow we need to know certain things and conspiracy theories and garbage that's out there? It's like, anyway, it shows how far the mind can go. To whom be glory forever and ever. Amen. So it says, who gave himself for our sins that he might deliver us from this present evil world. And really, sometimes it comes down to, we really believe this is the case, that it's an evil world. See, really everyone who's ever left, that's what they've embraced. Because they don't see it as an evil world. They don't grasp what they've had the opportunity to begin escaping and come out of. They go back to it, they want it, or they go to it because that's what they want. That's their choice. And you can't change them. Though it kills you, hurts you inside to watch such things take place, we all have our own minds. And God will bring to light what's in that mind, one way or another, whether we choose to acknowledge it or not. Hopefully we do, and are in agreement with God and understand it hurts like mad. But wrong is wrong, evil is evil, and hopefully it'll come to light in time. So again, that's why God admonishes us as he does. 3 John 11 here. Beloved, it says, do not follow that which is evil, but that which is good. Choices. Do we follow what's good? Do we want what is good? Do we fight for what is good? Or do we embrace something that's wrong, that's evil, that's filled with drama? Going on. One who does good is of God. So real good has to come from God and has to dwell on God and God in them. Otherwise, real good isn't accomplished, because only real good comes from God. Man's good isn't good. It's evil. Are we convicted of that? Do we believe that? So again here, one who does good is of God, and one who does evil, it's recorded here, has not seen, but it really isn't a good translation, does not see God. Doesn't see God. So if evil is embraced, individuals leave, they come to a point where they don't see God. They really don't see God in the picture of things. Well, there is so much more to give in this, and here I thought you'd be out early today, and I haven't even gotten to so much, but enough that hopefully we're able to focus upon what has been given to us and understand more deeply that there's so much to come to grasp and understand about a whole process of time, why God has allowed things to be as they have, and why evil exists, that it's only through that process that the choices of true life can come about. We as human beings have to experience what we are first. It's the only way. We had to be born with selfish human nature. And to grasp that process that's been handed down through time of what we are, only in that way, once God begins to call us and draw us, can we make the choices in life because we've experienced the human life, that we can actually make that kind of a choice properly. Otherwise, it's not really a choice. So because we've experienced it, and God begins to show us something new in the mind that we weren't able to see before, He shows us a life that is different, that is unique, and we begin to see the truth of it, and the truth about God that we see isn't in the world. And God helps us to see dramatic things that are so different from the world that it makes it easier for us if we choose. No Christmas, no Easter, no Sunday worship, no Trinity, none of the crazy things that are out there, no communion. You know, all these things that are so perverted and so distorted in the world. No praying through a woman, supposedly, whatever it might be. No Joshua or Jesus as it is with long hair and effeminate in nature. Not a weak being, person at all, and on it goes. Things that God lets us see this dramatic difference of what it's like to not be of a fake Protestant mentality, and what it's like to embrace what is true, the right kinds of foods to eat and why. And that's just the beginning. And on it goes, and beginning to understand holy days and what they picture and what they're all about, that God has a plan for us. But it begins with us being carnal and selfish. And we've got to fight this in order to receive what God has placed before us. And there's no other way we can make those choices except the way God has given it to be accomplished. And if we see those things, we'll recognize that it's beautiful. It's truly beautiful what God has given us to embrace. It is awesome. It inspires. It helps us to rejoice in God's plan and purpose. It helps us to be excited about it. And as we see certain things come together, to become even more excited as we grow, as God lets us see how this world is changing and getting ready for a time of one rule by God Almighty through His Son Joshua and the 144,000, one government, one system and truth that's given throughout the world for mankind to have finally, instead of all the deception and foolishness and stupidity of human beings. It's beautiful. It's up to us to choose to embrace it, to want it with all of our being, to recognize that we have to make the choice to fight against the evil, and to understand we can see it in the world in large part. Sometimes people don't because that's what they embrace. But to really see that it's in here, and this has to be conquered. That which was put in the watery grave that we made a covenant with God about, I don't choose that. I want to keep that head under the water, and I want to walk in newness of life forevermore, and do that with all of our being, because we're being truthful. We're being truthful to ourselves, to others around us, and to God. And then to understand that only God can help create that within us as we yield to and cry out for that process to be alive within us.